Hey guys, welcome back into another lecture. Today I'm going to present you a special blitz weapon against French opening. It's because you made a lot of requests for this one, and lately also this gambit became very popular. So what am I talking about? After e4, e6, white just goes with c4. And after d5, c takes d5, e takes d5, and queen to b3. Occasionally, I'm a French player myself, and not long ago, I played against someone who went for this queen b3, and I was laughing like, what is this guy doing again? During the game and in the beginning, maybe it looked so funny, but just after like 10 moves, it wasn't that funny anymore because I became like completely outplayed. So I just have to tell you that the following gambit scores really well in the practice for white. Lately, it became very popular, and strictly you can use it in faster time controls. When I talk about faster time controls, I mainly talk about blitz. And apart from blitz, you can use it, of course, in bullet chess and sometimes rapid games. It's not for longer games, but if you enjoy tactics and crazy positions, feel free to share your experience with us. So after queen b3, there are so many moves. I know 5. And let's go one by one. What happens if knight c6? Black goes for knight c6. Nothing. You just take the pawn, and they just go knight b4. That's practically the only move where they just try to get the pawn back immediately. So you just defend the pawn. Anyways, in the Orthoschnapp Gambit, we just want to use this battery on the diagonal, queen b3, bishop c4, going after the pawn on f7. In terms of that, we can just say that we at the moment threaten d6 followed by bishop f7. So after they go knight f6, they just go, actually we just go with the knight f3. Here d6 is not an option. You can just have fun at home and to make sure why. So you play knight f3, they get the pawn back, castles and bishop e7. Knight c3, now you challenge them to take on c3, in which case you would make intermediary bishop f7. And when they go c6, you play h3 in order to avoid bishop g4. Although even if bishop g4 happens there, you would always have knight e5. After castles, rook e1, h6, and d4. It's one of those normal type of games where you ended up with the IQP, isolated queen pawn, and you definitely have a certain amount of initiative on the king side. Also, having the queen on b3 is also pretty challenging for black because they do not have an easy bishop e6 moves all the time. Also, your knight from f3 will go on e5. And even if they manage to do somehow bishop e6 after queen c7 or rook b8, you will always have some knight g6 ideas if the bishop gets there. Pretty easy position for playing with white pieces, and I'd say white has small but a long-lasting advantage. Apart from fourth move knight c6, there is also a possibility with the queen e7. Queen e7 might be a very common black choice against Orthoschnapp Gambit on lower and medium levels. The reason for it is very simple. Black just wants to pin the king on e1 and pawn on e4, while he doesn't care so much about the development of the rest of his pieces. Here, in my opinion, the best move is to go with the knight c3. It's better to carry on developing your pieces than to go with, for Orthoschnapp Gambit, pretty typical pawn sack with d3. Here, this d3 pawn sack could be played, but it's not fully my suggestion because of d takes c4. And when you play knight c3, they take the second pawn. This is a typical pawn sack in this gambit. So when you play bishop e3, what scares me is d2 move. I simply don't like it. I like it when the bishop is on c4. So any d2, you just face by placing your king on f1 and escaping these checks by that. But here, if we have to take by king, and they go queen d8, solidifying their position, I just have to say that it's a little bit weird. After like 10 moves of opening, all black pieces, I'm talking about the minor and heavy pieces, are on the back rank. So you just go with the king e1. Who likes lots of attractiveness in chess, creative like options, and of course, games and compensation? Feel free to try this out. And once again, I just hope that you're going to like share lots of wins in these positions with me. Of course, the plan could be knight f3, rook d1, bishop c4. Uh, the fact by itself that black hasn't developed a single minor or heavy piece says enough for itself. So definitely, we just have to say that even though we have, I'm going to put a red color on this king, which means even though we get a broken castle, we just have like better development of the rest of our piece. Then the fourth move could be c6 as well. It doesn't change much in our strategy. If after knight c6 we had to take on d5, if after queen e7 we played knight c3, the same thing and the same approach we're going to have against c6 as well. Here I have a couple of interesting. Sorry. Actually, after queen e4, after queen e7, sorry, fourth move, knight c3, when they play so we don't play d3, we play knight c3. I showed you the line with the d3 where you sack the pawn and at the same time break your castle. But if knight c3, c6, you just go d4, he takes bishop c4. On any b5, you just provoke like the weakening of the pawn structure, and you can maybe easier break it with some a4 or so. So after knight f6, now you go with my novelty that is aimed against b5. The thing is, when you play like a4, you prevent b5 for the time being, develop your bishop on g5, and in case of knight bd7, in order to solidify their knights and to get a flexible knight, you just go with queen b7. In case they go with bishop g6, like let's wait and see what is white gonna do, then you just go with the h4 with a pretty nice aggressiveness by white here. Now we just go on to the fourth move, c6. In case of in the case of c6, right now you once again keep the same approach, and they have two options: knight f6 straight away and d4. Engines, for example, prefer d4. But it's exactly the moment where I have a specialty, and it's also a very typical type of tactical tricks, and let's just say one of those moves where you just run an initiative. It's bishop c4. Once again, this potentially lethal weapon with the battery on queen on b3 and bishop on c4, where you threaten to take on f7. For example, they just have to go with knight h6. What happens if they go d takes c3? You first take on f7, and in case they go with the king d7, you play d takes c3. This is undefendable position for black players. You'll go with bishop f4 and long castle. Same thing happens if king goes on e7. You just go d takes c3, where you threaten bishop g5, followed by e5, rook d1 or long castle, knight f3, and by the way, at the moment you just threaten the most obvious bishop takes g8. So these positions are hardly defendable. I don't want to say hardly, actually, they're a loss for black. And that's why after d4, bishop c4, they just have to defend on h6. When that happens, you just go with the rest of the moves in this position, and you can just play like a bunch of normal moves, such as knight c on e2, and to play the rest of the game with like this. An interesting possibility could be also d3 followed by bishop h6, but certainly I would move this knight away and continue to play a game with a little bit, I would say, just not so normal development for the rest of the black pieces. And finally, in case they go with knight f6, this is an important moment because you may consider d4 as an option. The problem is, will they play d takes c4, bishop c4, and when they play queen e7 or queen d7 or even queen c7, which is not likely to be an option in other variations, can we hope for something? That's why I suggest e5 here, and after knight f to d7 to go with d4. Position is pretty original. We just have this pawn chain in the center that is so easy to be broken, but at the same time, they also have problems. Typical French break is c5, but you can't play c5 here because the d5 pawn is about to fall. So that's why I think another typical French break f6 is needed here. When we take on f6, play bishop d3, play knight f3, and go with h3. Afterwards, we're just going to go with bishop e3 castles and place our rooks, most likely on open files like rook f to e1 and rook a to c1. Fairly interesting position. White is a little bit better. And I also checked this position with an engines. It does work successfully for white. And let's take a look at the fourth move, knight f6. That's a very common option. Here you have a couple of alternatives. I always go with the knight c3 approach. That's my favorite one, but I've seen a couple of strong players went for e5 as well. Interesting option because black just has to go with this knight into the center of the board. And even though lots of top guys think, and I even, you know, like I've seen that they played knight c3. Knight c3 is not a good move. It was played in so many blitz games by pretty good guys, but it's pretty dangerous for white after bishop c5. Have, you know, like some fun with this stuff at home, but believe me, black is just better in this position. That's why after early e5, you gotta play knight f3 in order to support d4 at some point. After knight c5, you gotta play queen e3, and after knight c6, bishop e5. Somehow, this position doesn't look so natural to me. And that's why I opted for the line that Grandmaster Kirill Shevchenko played in a couple of his practical games, mostly entitled Tuesdays. That's why I'm telling you, you just have to use this opening in your blitz games. And in blitz games, he had so far big success because most of these games just managed to win in a pretty small amount of. So after knight c3, which is definitely my suggestion, they just go d4. And once again, we go for that little weapon, queen b3 and bishop c4, threatening on f7. After they go with, in this variation, d takes f7, you play bishop f7, and after king e7, e5. You have a very dangerous initiative. King on e7 is in a very, I would say, compromised position. So this is good. After like queen d7, what Grandmaster Rychagov played against Shevchenko, he's got two possibilities to go with e5, what he did. But I just have to say that he did not manage to create any, I'd say, compensation because we're down a pawn. e5, knight g4, he sacked another pawn, jump with the knight, and after knight e5, knight f3, knight c4, queen c4, even though he managed to win this game in a small amount of moves, it's mainly because of blunder. So after knight c6, honestly speaking, I believe that black solved all his opening problems and black shouldn't have any opening problems. Because of this, instead of fifth move e5, I suggest knight f3. And it's one of those games where you just have a very simple, simple position, very simple game. So let me just show you what happens there. After you play knight f3, you just threaten to jump with the knight on e5 and fight against f7 and the queen on d7. If they take d takes c3, you just have a very dangerous knight g5. And when they play knight c6, bishop f7, king d8, d takes c3. Even though engine prefers black, I just have to say that this is not a typical human position. So when I say that, I mean maybe engines can defend this type of game very successfully, but humans can hardly do that. With the king not being able to castle anymore, so being like condemned to be in the center for the rest of the game, a queen that blocks these pieces, inability for black to complete his development successfully. I believe that this should be like a very, very pleasant type of game. That's why knight c6 is more common. And here, don't go with e5 or knight g5. I just like the knight d5. I just like the knight d5 move, and I'd say that this is an improvement of mine in these positions. They just have to go with knight d5. I believe if knight takes e4, that just gives us a very pleasant castle, rook e1, and lots of problems for them afterwards. So after knight d5, you just take by bishop. I'm usually very afraid of knight a5 when the knight stands on c6. So when they play this knight a5, and when the bishop and queen stands on b3 and c4, it's dangerous because we lose, like attacking power and that battery. Here, that's not a case. You play queen to d3. For example, they can't play c5 because you play knight a5. And when they go bishop d6, of so many interesting possibilities against the French, this is the only game of mine in Orthoschnapp Gambit with white pieces. It was played like a few months ago, and I just have to show you that it ended up in 12 moves against an FM. So the guy played bishop d6 to prevent knight e5. I played knight g5, threatening on f7. And when the guy thought probably, he wants to go with bishop or knight takes f7, made castle, I just played e5, threatening the bishop, threatening on f7, and he resigned the game. It's the only game, man. Usually I have much more games played in certain openings. I haven't tried this one against French so many times, but the thing is, I have so many interesting options against the French that this is just one of a million ones. And finally, let's go into the main line. D takes e4. After d takes e4, we play bishop c4. You know how much I like to create this battery. They have queen e and queen d7. In case of queen d7, you just go with a3, and it's one of those typical pawn sacrifices that we usually go for. Now they have two options, to take this pawn and to play knight c6. I'm a little bit more afraid of knight c6, but let's take a look at, in my opinion, weaker one. Now we haven't committed ourselves with the knight on c3, which means that we can go with knight f3. And after, watch out, we even threaten knight e5 now. So just because of that, because we threaten knight e5, they gotta go with bishop d6. In my opinion, queen e7 is more interesting. And after bishop e3, queen b4 check. Now they take advantage of not having the knight on c3, and they can give us this check. Although after knight c3, queen b3, I would take by pawn, not by bishop. I wouldn't keep the healthy pawn structure. Why? Because I open a file. I like my rook being on open a file. And on top of all that, I like the fact that the pawn on d3 is about to die. White has a very nice compensation. Watch out. We're still, at the moment, we're down 2 pawns. d3 is about to fall. Knight b5 is threatened. I believe after a short castle, rook e1, with the possible ideas of knight b5 or knight d5, white has a full initiative. Instead of this, most of these guys whose games I analyzed there played bishop d6. You play castles, knight f6, rook e1, king f8, and knight c3. Once again, we're down 2 pawns. d3 is about to fall every single moment. And it's difficult for black. King is so weak on f8, they can't make castle. This pawn is about to fall. I can play bishop g5, bishop f6. I can play knight g5 going after the potentially weak f7 pawn. And this just looks better for... I'm afraid much more of knight c6 after d3. And this knight c6 goes after the battery. And unfortunately, I couldn't find anything better for white but to get the pawn back. This happened in a game between Shevchenko and Tragubov played in Title Tuesday back to 2020. And after knight a5, I'm very, like sad that we won't be able to use the battery anymore. But after queen c2, knight c4, queen c4, knight f6, knight c3, queen e6. Here, Shevchenko had to put the queen back. And according even to top engines, this position is unclear. Fortunately for that guy, Grandmaster Tragubov played bishop before, and Shevchenko came up with this check, and this guy lost. Can you imagine 2600 GM to make a blunder like this? Why don't they ever make blunders like this against me in blitz games? So after b6, I analyzed this position and came up with the following conclusion. f3 is a specialty. f3 is a specialty because you want to create this pretty strong barrier against the bishop on b7, which at the moment hits the wall. And it really hits the wall and you cannot easily break it. On the other hand, you develop your knight on h3, which gives you a possibility to jump on f4 most likely, less likely g5, and with the bishop on e3 in order to oppose any bishop c5 threats by black. And finally, if they go for queen e7 fifth move, we just go with the knight c3. And when we play knight c3, once again, we threaten all this stuff, such as, I don't know, knight d5, or just d3, e takes d3, and bishop e3. Here we just have to check two possibilities for black, knight f6 and knight c6. And of course, the main move c6. When they play knight f6, your main idea is to go with d4. d4, its main idea is, if they just, for example, play knight c6, continue to develop themselves. You can play knight f5 because of queen b5. So bishop d7, you take the pawn, you take another pawn, and you just go with a crazy d5. I just analyzed these positions. So after like bishop d6, a3, queen c3, knight c3, bishop c7, you know how much theory one has to know in order to reach this position with the black pieces. Although I have to be honest and to say that this is equal game. So this is, for example, full equality with the black pieces. Just like you see during this lecture, you could have seen that in many of these variations, black can have like pretty good positions out of the opening, or equalize easily, or he can just force white to play a compensation. That's why I'm telling you, in shorter time controls, this line is has like a higher probability of doing something special, while in shorter time controls, it's very difficult for them to defend. In case they take, you just go with the typical bishop a3. And when they go now with d2, you have king on f1. That's what I was telling you previously. And you just go knight f3, you will get the pawn back. What do you want? You just want to go like this and go rook to e1, like bishop d2, rook e1. They can never play knight a5 as long as the situation is like this, because you have queen b5, and that's either winning a piece, or they just have to go back, which gives you a great time to play afterwards bishop d2 followed by rook to e1. But when they go knight g4, you just go knight d5. And when they move this queen back to d8, it's the most logical place, because you don't want to put it on queen d7, because it's gonna block the light square bishop. But if it happens, you just go knight f3, and when they take, you also take with a wide variety of options, like long or short castle. A great position for white. But if they play queen d8, I just go long castle. Once again, this reminds me of Nordic or Danish gambit, where you have like everything open, and like them, that they have to suffer a lot in terms of development. After knight c3, and sixth move, knight c6, you just go with the knight g2. I like knight g2. I believe it's a nice improvement because knight d5, queen d7, and queen g3 is once again something dangerous for us because they have to find one almost forced move, and it's not so difficult to find it. Like, let's defend the pawn. Certainly, it's way more logical to defend it by sacking the pawn with the bishop d6 than bringing the king to d8, where they just break the castle. So when they play bishop d6, you take on g7, and when they play bishop e5, you play queen g. Now they got a pawn back, but they have a way better development, and in my opinion, this is better for black. So that's why I think the seventh move should be knight g and e2, and when they go knight f6 to go castle. This is certainly a compensation, and then we can consider seriously an option of playing d3 and completing our development and going with either another pawn sack after he takes d3, knight f4, or something else like bishop takes d3, where you play with a pretty good compensation. Finally, when they play c6, let's take a look at the final line here. We just go with d3. It's very important not to go with d4 because I realized that when you go with d4, they have this b5 idea straight away. And that's a good thing for them because when they play bishop e2, they just have knight f6. And it's a good position for. In order not to face this, so once again, don't play the seventh move d4. Go for d3. Go for the seventh move d3. And when you play d3, I'll insist once again. If they play knight f6, d takes e4. When they play knight e4, knight e4, knight e2, you just have a full compensation for the given material and much better development, even though you're down a pawn. If you make short castle, they're dead. In case of b5, now we do not have a typical knight b5, bishop d5 idea when the knight doesn't stand on f6. I'm going to show you that trick a little bit later. So we gotta go back with the bishop. Once again, taking on e4 is extremely risky for them, so they go b4, knight a4, and they take the pawn. Taking by knight gives us an easy knight f3, castles, bishop a3, and you just have a broken pawn structure and, to be honest, miserable pawn up for black. In case of queen e4, you just go knight f3, bishop d6, castle short, and now they do not have time to take because we go with the rook e1 and win the queen. When they play castles, we play bishop d3, queen d5. We go for the bishop h7. They gotta take, threatening knight b6. They gotta go here and play bishop g5. I analyze this position, and it looks very nice for a while. We have a nice compensation, even though we're down opponent, even though we have like a broken pawn structure and a pair of double pawns on b2 and b3. They can't move the dark square bishop from c7 because of knight b6. They have a broken pawns. I'm talking about the pawns a7 before c6. I can always place my rook from a1 to c1 if needed. If I see that he stubbornly and constantly keeps taking like a good care of knight b6 ideas. At the same time, I'm threatening at a moment bishop f6. So this is like a very, very good position for. And finally, what happens if they play d3, urgent b5? I have my own analysis here. Here, you just go for a very interesting piece sack when there's no knight on f6. You just go knight takes b5. This is a nice one. And I'm going to show you what I found that happened in a couple of Blitz games, not mine. E takes d3, you just go with the king on f1, and you just urgently want to solve the problem of e takes d5, always bishop d5, and now they have problems. They can't play bishop b7 because you always have this check, always. And when they play something else, now the king is not on f1, so they can give us check and trade these pieces off also. This is a problem for them. And if they go with the bishop e6, like, hey man, you won't be able to touch my rook because the queen is dying, you always have this check. Now you threaten the rook. Now they have to go like this, and you go with the queen b7. And now, actually, it is important to see why is king good on f1, because they do not have queen b4 to solve this problem with this bishop d5 threat. And by the way, this rook on a8 is about to fall. And just because of this, because of that, they have to go with, instead of e takes d3, they gotta capture. You play bishop d5, and they have to go with this. What's the difference? When they give check, they did not include e takes d3, and now our king is on e1, not on f1. So they have to play bishop d7. If knight d7, you just take on a8. So when they play bishop d7, you play queen b7. Looks like rook is about to fall, but they also have their own like improvements here. After queen b4, we have to play bishop d2, and when they take the queen, they will play bishop c6. I analyzed these positions, and I realized that after rook c1, because we threaten rook c8, we do get some sort of activity, but position is unclear with mutual chances. So this is not only my opinion about this, the final assessment of this game, but I also put it on the engine, I would say with mutual counter chances. So just like you see, I was trying to be very objective in this lecture. I didn't want to cheer up for the white's position, and I was just trying not to persuade you to play this in tournament games. There are like so many interesting options that black can go for, but from another point of view, in faster time controls, you can win like a whole bunch of games using this gambit. Hope that you enjoyed, and see you next time.